I decided tonight to spend a little more time and make this a little more personal. I feel like I can walk through a bunch of the hows of like how we built our company, the mechanics of it, but I've seen some of the past topics that you guys have already seen in this lecture series. And so I thought it would be better, instead of just talking about the how, it really is going to come down to some why. And I'm going to be pulling a little philosophy into the equation, since you guys are in the economics realm. I'm sure you can appreciate some good philosophy as well. And so the goal today, to me, is just that you would leave at least a little more inspired, some of you, to go use the marketplace or the nonprofit sector to build some solutions to problems that you're seeing around you that maybe you're frustrated with. Maybe you've expressed frustrations verbally to your friends or your family or your spouse or your teachers or whoever, but maybe you haven't taken action. And I'm going to encourage you to think about one way and one problem that you might be able to take action on. And so tonight is a series of conversations about my journey, about some of my passions and how that is expressed itself in the company. So without further ado, I'm going to start with a video and hope that it works. It's 2.5 minutes, but it will give you a flavor of how a coffee company has invested in the lives of kids all throughout our supply chain and the amazing good that can come from intentional business. But that's a taste of one of the programs that we have been able to build into our own supply chain. All right, I'm seeing thumbs up. That's great. I love interaction. And what I really want to do with the really awesome UFM crowd is help you see that doing social enterprise is in no way contradictory to Austrian economics. The business of business is indeed business, as Milton Friedman has taught us. But business is about choosing to do what society needs and getting rewarded for it. And we have the freedom to choose on why we do it. We can maximize shareholder profits, but we can also maximize the impact that we're having. And when there are some trade-offs, sometimes companies like us are absolutely willing to cede some profitability to help society flourish. And that, to me, is the essence of the free market. And it's why I do what I do. And it's why I'm excited to share a little bit about that with you. Let me share. The question that I had posed to the group for this talk is, how can you build enterprises that scale human flourishing? And as I put this together, I came to this one conclusion. It's through the free market, and it's through voluntary cooperation, as our good friend Milton Friedman has laid out. And it can be through for-profit ventures, it can be through nonprofit ventures, and indeed it can be through public ventures. And my career journey through all of those has basically taught me that you can hold to these values and express them in different institutions and achieve some amazing good. So that is the essence of what we're going to talk about tonight. So this is the key thesis, that society is in our hands and we can shape these institutions, and nothing is going to prevent us, if we will, from building a society that relies on this voluntary cooperation. And that when we do that, we're actually going to succeed at preserving and expanding human freedom, which, as we know, is actually the key to expanding human flourishing. And it's going to mean that the other groups that come in when government tries to crowd out individual liberty it's actually going to be the thing that prevents that from happening because society is working. So I believe that voluntary cooperation gives us liberty to work in the for-profit and the nonprofit and in the public sectors and bring some incredible solutions to society. So I'm going to give you the answers to the question we posed right up front, so you can just know that you got your money's worth, and then you can tune out for the rest of the ride. 2 simple steps on how you can participate in building enterprise at scale flourishing. First, it starts with building yourself. What is your why? Why would you do this? Where is your worth coming from? And if you miss this is where I'm going to camp out as a decent amount. If you don't understand where your own why is coming from, and you're going to succumb to the desires of society around you, of what's popular in the moment, of your own selfish desires, it is actually going to squash your organization's ability to succeed. And I've seen it happen now time and time again. So we're going to camp out on there. And once you start to nail your why, which is a journey of all of life, so you're not going to solve it all in one thing, and I haven't solved mine, but once you get on that journey, you can start actually building the institutions themselves. And the secret there is simply matching the right solution to the right problem set and not trying to use the wrong tool for the wrong problem, which is essentially why government trying to build an economy doesn't work, because it's not actually generating the income from the ground level. It's not solving something from the market. And it's why a for-profit venture may not be able to do certain things that are in the public domain, like create an army that defends territory or create laws that promote flourishing. So there are certain domains, certain problem sets need specific solutions. And then we have to do all of that with excellence. So you only live once, as the expression goes. So what is your why? And how are you going to spend your life? And here's a really fascinating challenge that I feel like our modern era is facing, which is this happiness problem that we actually have around the culture around us is actually misunderstanding contentment and happiness. And I think that's partly why you're seeing it. I don't know how deep the divisions are in Guatemala, but in the United States, we're facing significant political angst because people are unhappy and they're expressing it through political means. And these are 2 great AEI, American Enterprise Institute scholars that just published a book on this. But that's their thesis, is that we have a happiness problem. Why is that? Well, here's where we get to go deep into philosophy from my good Italian friend, Boethius, who I don't know if you guys cover Boethius at all. Maybe it's too philosophical, but he says we've looked in the wrong places for our contentment. So 2 quotes that I pulled from this that I really would encourage you to read this book. But oh, how happy were men long ago when they were content with nature and not corrupted with wealth. And then this concept that the fruits of the earth are meant for the nourishing of living things. And by all means, take what you need. There's no point in asking fortune for more. It would be absurd to go from contentment to superfluity, because what you add will be either unpleasant or actually harmful. All that's really saying, which is that life is meant to be enjoyed. The wealth and the things around us are to serve a purpose. But when we take beyond what we really need, and that becomes our core driver, it becomes unpleasant to ourselves, and it can actually harm those around us. So this is not a decree against wealth. This is not a decree against the pursuit of profit. This is merely checking our own hearts and our motivations and making sure that we are not going to be driven by things that are never going to satisfy and that will actually harm us. Boethius' story is amazing. He was a 29-year-old, highly affluent, highly influential person in Venetian society. He was an advisor to the prince. He had the largest library. He was considered one of the smartest and wealthiest people in all of what was then the eastern side of the Roman Empire after the main Roman Empire had split. This was around in the 4th century, 5th century AD, I guess. And he falls from the prince's graces because he gives him counsel that the prince doesn't like to hear. And so he gets his family stripped from him, he gets his wealth, and he's thrown into prison. And he's put on death row and he ends up getting executed. But while he's in prison, wasting away, he's lamenting the loss of all of these physical things. And Lady Philosophy comes in, and that's where she becomes his consolation. And she starts to ask him very Socratic, probing questions about why is he actually discontent. And she basically helps him discover that he's discontent for the wrong reasons, and that he actually had put his hope in these things like wealth, which can never fully satisfy. So it's fascinating, right? So the moment we can free ourselves from being fully bound by that, we become free to voluntarily cooperate to make society better. Again, I'm not saying you cannot have wealth. I'm not saying we need to be ashamed of wealth, but I am saying if that becomes your end, you're going to be highly dissatisfied and you may end up harming yourself and others. Now, how did this random guy who's talking to you today come to fall in love with guys like Boethius out there? Well, I can look at my career and say it has been a very non-traditional journey. It is a series of choices. And I'm sharing this because you're going to do the same thing. You are going to enter into a series of decisions throughout your life that's going to set your career path. And this series, you can choose to be, motivated by the things society tells you to be motivated by, or you can find your why and stick with it. And so this was, I'll share a tiny bit about my story. I grew up in my parents got divorced when I was 11. And that was kind of my first have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps moment of, okay, mom's out working 3 jobs. Now it's time, we have to fend for ourselves, my brother and I. And so we did. We started working, started experimenting with all sorts of things. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I definitely was not on an amazing path. And for me, it was a spiritual awakening where I felt like I met the maker of the universe. And from that moment on, it put me on another course to see that life was much bigger than how I was perceiving it. That sent me off to college with a different light. And in college, every summer for me, instead of taking an internship at a company, I've pursued things that made me where my passion lied. So one was I spent a summer in an orphanage in Peru, which is where this picture of Machu Picchu is from. And that set me on a whole course for my whole career of seeing the need of these orphans and seeing how forgotten they were and feeling like this does not seem right. And so the rest of my career has been a bunch of decisions that have taken me all over the world. And so that helped me start to evaluate the world and see that if we're all longing for the same things, what was it that was keeping us in separate tracks? And I came to this sad conclusion that every philosopher before me also has done, this is not novel, that we actually are all really selfish, but there's this kind of spectrum. And this is like a really this is a small way of me trying to communicate what's in my head of what the spectrum could look like. But essentially, we're all on the selfishness spectrum somewhere. And where our motivations lie, the more they skew towards selfishness, the less good we're ultimately going to create in society. And there's some fine balance between selflessness and selfishness. Some selfishness is really good. It causes you to survive, right? Causes you to protect yourself, causes you to plan for the future. There's a lot of good things. But at the end of the day, if you go fully into the selfish camp, you're going to be greatly limited at what you contribute. And I'm sure you guys can all name friends and people that you know who fall far on one side of the spectrum, and they're probably not your favorite people. So we all have to analyze ourselves and work towards getting off of this. So here's 4 simple things that I feel like you could do today on your journey to understanding your why. First is getting out of your bubble. We all surround ourselves with people who talk like us, think like us, are in the same socioeconomic class as us. You got to get out of that. And the more you do, the more you're going to see that there's this beautiful world out there that you're missing out on and that you can potentially partner with, join. You'll grow your horizons. Second, I'd say consult timeless literature. So don't just read current events and current thinking, step back into other time periods, and you're going to find a lot of common themes and meanings there. Make sure you're creating space for personal reflection and build really good and deep friendships, because that is going to be a secret to life. They'll help you through the hard times, and they'll speak truth to you when no one else is willing to. So that's a little bit of my observations, which led then into a decision. So I was at a very senior role with the US government in the Middle East, and I had the opportunity to, I could have gone to New York City and taken a much higher paying job, or I could have moved back to my hometown and joined my dad, who had a very serious case of leukemia and was not in good health. And it was not actually a simple decision, because I had a lot of counsel who basically told me, oh, you can fly and see your dad, but you can't go get these opportunities in these bigger places for your career. And you've built this whole career. You should go to New York or go back to DC or wherever. And that just didn't feel right. So here was another decision, which was, let's move back to my hometown. Let's change my whole career, and let's do it because it makes sense for my family. And that was the right decision at the time. And what that did was then put me into this realm of finding a new career. And I stumbled into a group called Thrive Farmers. And so how do you go from being a diplomat in the Middle East to joining a coffee company? That's how you do it. You make a series of decisions that are fairly unrelated, and all of a sudden you're in a coffee venture. But I didn't just join anything because I needed a job. I joined Thrive because they were on a mission to build a thriving world, which is truly what our mission statement is. We exist to build a thriving world, and we have 2 arms to do it. And they needed me to come and launch the nonprofit venture that goes hand in hand with the for-profit, which is actually a very interesting institutional model that I haven't seen in other places, at least the way that we do this. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do at Thrive and ThriveWorks and why it's fairly unique. And then we will open up for any question that you all have. So at the end of the day, we really are a coffee and tea company. We source products from 12 different countries, And our whole mantra is that we would bring higher prices to farmers by profit sharing and streamlining the value chain. We would bring transparency to the supply chain in a place that's been very clouded for hundreds of years, and that we would bring exceptional products to our customers. So that goes back into the, how do you do this? Well, you really need to have a business model that is serving a market that is good. I mean, you can't have an amazing heart and then a terrible product and expect it to succeed. So we have some of the best products in the world, but every product comes attached to a farmer who we either know personally, or we have a team on the ground that's built relationships with and knows their community personally, which is awesome. And it's so much fun. So this is our cold brew, which is partly sourced from farms in Guatemala. Remember when I talked about, you've got to have the right solution towards the right problem set. So in the coffee industry, I'm sure many of you are part of it. So you know this firsthand. So this is a slide I use for an American audience who doesn't fully understand that a lot of the issues that they care about, like migration, can also is linked to the economic challenge that people are not included in a supply chain and they're not able to earn a living. So the Washington Post a couple of years ago did a really brilliant display of the migration coming out of Central America and the collapse of the coffee markets. And obviously it's not a one for one, but it was getting at the heart of why our model existed, which is if we can give stable high prices at scale to farmers, and we can do business with large farmers and small farmers, then everybody in that system is going to benefit from the higher pricing and the stable pricing, which gives them the opportunity to predict, gives them the opportunity to invest. And so that's what we did. And so this is a little out of order, but essentially we've built a system that now is enabling around 59% of the value chain. This is 2019 numbers. So this was the last data set that we had, that I have access to, that stays in the countries that produce our coffees. There was a study out recently and around that same time that said the average coffee growing country is only capturing 10% of the value chain. Now, I don't think it's 100% an apples to apples of what they were calculating and what we're calculating, but the concept is real, that our model is designed to keep as much of the value in producing countries and less of the value in the consuming country. And that creates this amazing economic multiplier principle that goes straight into communities. When I also ran our numbers in 2019, the additional profits that our farmers in Guatemala earned over their next best option. So this is not like our total payment. This was just the additional profit share that we do that's unique to our company, was equal to 12.5% of the US government's foreign assistance to agriculture to Guatemala. And we're not a big company. That was a year we did about $20 million in total revenue. So that's a pretty small coffee company. And yet just our profit share alone was equal to 12.5% of what the US government was putting into farming in Guatemala, which we all know doesn't actually touch the farms. So the beauty when you do this right is that every dollar that farmer is earning from us is going straight into that community. And we've calculated and backed it with academic literature that that's creating at least a $2.75 to $3 multiplier for every dollar that goes into the community. So the money multiplier of a farmer earning more for that country and that community is significant. This is far more effective than any kind of government created program or aid that could possibly happen. And it's all done through free market people like us. So how do we continue to succeed? We've got to have the best products. We've got to give customers amazing experiences. This is our coffee shop in Atlanta. So if you ever come through Atlanta, you should come to the Cold Brew Bar. It has won design awards. It's rated one of the best coffee shops in all of Atlanta, which also means the Southeast. And it's doing really well. You can see on the wall, I don't know if you can, how clearly you can see on this, but we even publish our prices of what our farm gate price to the farmer was for that coffee. So it's a subtle way to just educate consumers on, what's going on in the coffee market. Now, most don't notice and most don't care as much as we care, but it's just subtle ways that we can even help raise awareness of why our model is so interesting. And then those are all taps. They're not alcoholic, but they have cold brew products that we put into kegs and put on tap, and they're really yummy. So we also have an exclusive contract with this company called ChickfilA. They're the most successful quick service restaurant in the world. They will probably do around $16 to $17 billion in sales. And they're kind of like the American Pollo Campero, like they're our chicken place. And yes, it's not exactly the same as Pollo Campero, but it's a great establishment. And so we do all their coffee and their cold brew. And one of the American taster groups, Thrillist, who does a lot of food, rated it as the #1 coffee in quick service. So you've got to deliver on great products. But what does that mean for actual individuals? Well, it means a lot. Vinicio Gonzalez was one of our first farmers. He's in a place in San Jose Pinula, in a little town called Concepcion Pinula. And he was featured on the Chick-fil-A product at the very beginning. This is the house that he built with the earnings from being in our system for the first few years, after he finally was able to take his family and move out of his parents' house. And then his oldest daughter went off to university, and he was able to pay for that because he had earned a proper living. She was the second girl out of his whole town to ever go to university, we were told. So the dignity that comes from doing generous and inclusive business is real. And so we're really excited and proud of that. And then Vinicio's cooperative, we calculated over a 5-year period, boosted their household income levels by about 50%. That is truly significant. If you guys know economic development and community development, the #1 thing that is needed is market access and jobs. And most NGOs and most government programs, they can try to kind of distort the market and try to create some kind of inclusion. But if it's not a company and a market need that's being met, it never is sustained. So this is exciting. But we had to ask ourselves, what do we do next? Because just because Vinicio now has built his house, what does that mean for the school system? What does that mean for the high dropout rates that were happening in rural communities? What does that mean for places in Huehuetenango that don't even have access to clean water and the kids are sick all the time? Could we do even more? And so for us, we felt like our calling was, yes, we need a nonprofit that is integrated into our supply chain that can help take empowered farmers and now develop empowered leaders. So the essence, I guess I went longer than I expected, but the essence of what we do at ThriveWorks is really simple. It's finding leaders of all ages. We work with a lot of youth, actually, and I think there's so much potential in the rural youth of every country we work in. And I do have an agenda at some point that I would love the UFM students and some of our top rural students to collaborate on some projects together at some point. But the idea is that if you empower a local leader, they are going to have the best solutions to their biggest problems. They're going to know what's really holding their community back. And so our job at ThriveWorks is to come behind them in the areas that they need it most and give them both the equipping. We do leadership seminars. We everything from camps to actual leadership training to strategic planning, project management, financial literacy. So we do these like basic building block things, but then as leaders rise up and start to initiate their own projects, we come behind them in 5 areas with additional resources. We say our job is to go out to the marketplace and find the best water partner there is for the communities that need clean water and have identified that as their number one issue they want to address. So where do we look? We try not to look outside of the country that we're working in. And so you all are really blessed because you have a group called Ecofiltro. And I think many of you know their story. You probably have their filters at home. You may have, every restaurant has them. But I think they are one of the most exciting free enterprise ventures that are scaling, flourishing that I've ever come across. But we find partners like that, and then we work with these communities and help them address their biggest needs. If there's not local solutions or there's not resources locally that at least are accessible to us, then we will go to the US or we'll go to Europe and we'll try to bring some of those best-in-class resources to bear with the goal of over time shifting that burden more and more locally, whether that's into the cities and connecting them to the rural areas or whether that's even regional hubs. So that's kind of the essence. We've done a lot of different things. I'd say overall, our biggest programs have focused on the leadership, as I shared. But what that's done is, like a lot of the projects that the local leaders do is education realm. The trash collection was a really interesting one. It came from a group of high school students that attended this leader academy that we were running. And their capstone project was to bring trash. It started with cleanup, right? So that's really easy. It's really basic. And they were like, hey, let's actually put receptacles so that everyone can start putting their trash in the receptacles. And then they finally went to the mayor and were like, hey, we've got the whole community behind this. Now we actually need trash collection. And so they finally got that. And we had the adults of the community come and say, for 40 years, we've asked the government to help us with trash collection and they didn't do anything. And these high school students made it happen. That's the essence of an empowered local solution that's coming through voluntary collaboration. Overall, the charity has served now about 18,000 people. We've done 59 different projects in 24 communities. But the interesting thing is that we doubled our impact during COVID, even though we shut all of our in-person programs down. And that was because we had a network of local leaders that we had been building for the previous 4.5 years who basically stepped up and said, hey, we're going to solve this. Like, here's what our community is facing. And so we created a really neat program for them with some co-funding. As long as they pitched a really good project that was innovative, that solved a need generated by COVID, then we would match them with a 50-50 grant. And it was a micro level. So the most we spent, I think, was like $1,000 or something. But we had a bunch of really neat solutions that came out of that. So back to where we started. How are you going to go build enterprises that scale flourishing? Figure out your why and go then build excellent enterprises. Here's your homework. You have to think about this and go and do it. What's one habit you could change in your life today that would help you gain clarity on your why? So what's something you're doing that is kind of keeping you stuck in a box that you could change? Is it reading? Is it pouring into friends? Is it traveling? Is it visiting a community that doesn't look like yours? What's a habit you can change that would help you understand your why? And then, this is harder. I mean, I need to be doing this here too. What's something about your town or your country that you've complained about multiple times? And then instead of complaining, what's one action you could take that would move towards fixing the problem. Obviously, like you can't fix everything overnight, but what's one thing you could do to make that problem a little bit better for somebody? That's your homework. And so it's back over to you with the camioneta. What's your next move? What bus are you going to get on? You only live once. That's it. I love books. This is like a small piece of my book collection. Man, like I would have so many recommendations, but I do really, when you're dealing with like, I think it's good to read some philosophy, and I find Boethius really easy to digest and read. It's a short book. It's not a dense book. It's very poetic. And it's just kind of fun hearing like a really wise, wealthy person go through that crucible experience. I don't know if I also like commend to a lot of people Marcus Aurelius's meditations. So it's like his journals that he didn't know was going to mean, we didn't intend them to be published. You know, it's not like you don't read that cover to cover in one sitting. It's just kind of individual proverbs, almost like wisdom. But I have always found him really insightful. And then obviously if you're at UFM, you've already read all of the good economics literature out there. So I probably don't need to recommend any of that. But do read fiction too. Make sure you're reading good fiction. The questions are self-explanatory. Just the homework is just promise me you'll take a moment to reflect on it. I mean, that's it. This is me just trying. I'm probably a little bit older than most of you on the call. And so I'm just looking back over my last 20 years and kind of reflecting on those, the path, the unpredictable nature of it, the reward that constantly came with pursuing things that were meaningful and interesting versus things that paid well. So for me, it worked. So I definitely feel like I wish more people would feel the freedom to make those decisions. And you all are right at the beginning of being able to start making those decisions. So I guess that then goes into my advice, which is for me, don't get blinded by a paycheck. Yeah, again, cover what you have to. If you're in a survival mode, like earn money however you have to earn money. But if you have the choice, you don't have to be blinded just by the paycheck alone. Figure out the things that are interesting and things you like. And I feel like over time, there could be a financial reward because you become really good at what you're doing and you stand out. But don't let that be your driver, because it's not that fun. I think I remember flying back from Saudi Arabia when I was working there, and I would come to New York and I'd go meet my friends, and my friends were working at Goldman Sachs and they're in investment banking, and so in my world that was like the pinnacle job of what somebody in their 20s and early 30s should be doing, and I just remember they were so much more miserable than I was, and they're making a lot more money, but I felt like I had the best job in the world. So anyways.